222.
Good morning. My name's Raj Jain. I'm chair of the Integrated Care Board. Just to some housekeeping stuff. This is a meeting in public, so unfortunately we will not be able to speak to members of the public who I'm really grateful for them to be here today, actually at the meeting, but we'll have an opportunity at the end of the meeting just to mingle, and all the directors will be around to mingle, so it'd be good to have a chat with members of the public then. The meeting here today we're hosted by Warrington and Carl here, and we'll hear from him shortly, so I'm delighted to be in this stadium. Some of us are local supporters who are even more delighted than me to be in this stadium. Thank you. Can I go to declarations of interest? Any declaration? Sorry, apologies, I've missed something really important. Let's do an introduction of the board. If I start off with John.
Good morning, I'm John Willen, Chief Digital Officer.
Good morning, I'm Director of Director of Performance and Planning.
Interest of councils.
Adam Irving, member of Primary Care Department, member of the Community Fund.
Good morning, Ian Ashford, Director of Public Health.
I'm Brian Christomosa, I'm the GP officer.
Tony Foy, Non-Exec Director.
Joe Rafferty, I'm Chief Executive of Merseyside NHS Trust and Chair of one of our provider.
Good morning, I'm Claire Watson, I'm the Assistant Chief Executive.
Good morning, Carl Marsh, Base Director for Warrington.
Graham Irwin, Chief Executive of the ICB.
Claire Wilson, Finance Director of the ICB.
Louise Murtagh from Holton and Warrington Place is here to take the minutes today.
Hello, I'm Chris Douglas, Director of Nursing and Care.
Good morning, Councillor Paul Cummins, Partner Member Local Government.
Good morning, Neil Large, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, I'm Anne Morag, Chief Executive of St Helens and Lesley Hospital, Southport and Ormskirk Hospitals and leader of the Acute Provider Collaborative for Cheshire and Merseyside.
Good morning, I'm Rowan Pritchard-Jones, Medical Director.
Morning, Fiona Lemons, Deputy Medical Director.
Good morning, Dave Wilson, I'm all health today.
Warren Escudale, Chief Exec of Voluntary Sector North West, BCF is rep as well.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies noted?
Apologies from Eric Morris.
Thank you. Declarations of interests. Any matters, declarations, matters on the agenda? Thank you. Should we go to the minutes of the previous meeting? Can I take any comments on accuracy or matters not arising on today's agenda? Steve?
Just on minutes, 10:22:12, provide a collaborative update. I think you remember I gave some comments at the meeting which are partially covered in the minutes, but I don't think we actually agreed to receive a strategic outline business case for this collaborative at the meeting. What we did agree to do was have further talks and discussions with Joe Rafferty and indeed with Colin Scowes about their proposals, which I've actually done, and there will be further conversations around improving integration and improving quality and arrangements between social care, disability and mental health, and provisions by those two trusts. But I don't think we agreed to do the business case, so therefore I'd like that removing, please, and also removing from the action log in the next item. It's also recorded that we're going to do a business case in March. I don't think I can agree to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I must say my recollection's different, Steve. I think maybe it's useful to look at the video recording, or let's just double check what was said. We can do that on the point about strategic case. Paul?
Thanks, Chair. I wasn't at the meeting, so I can't comment on the minutes. It's just in relation to Steve's comments. I've not been party to any discussion from local government and around social care around this. So, as far as I'm concerned, this hasn't been discussed anywhere.
Yeah. Can I just make a point of clarification? Clearly, this relates to accuracies of the minutes, but it's perhaps useful just to say. My understanding is that we saw a presentation by Joe at which it put forward an idea. There's quite a bit of detail to the idea, but that's just in essence what it was. My recollection of the conversation was that, okay, there's an idea, but you now need to go away, engage stakeholders, and come back at an appropriate time with a strategic outline case, if that is the right thing to do. That was my understanding, but should we double check that? Are people comfortable with that? Well, clearly we have a disagreement on what was said.
No, we didn't agree to move to an outline collaborative business case. We agreed to have further discussions. That's my point. You know, that's what's in the minutes and that's what's in the action log, and that's what I want withdrawing.
So Steve, you've made that point really clear, but let's just double check what was said and we'll correct it to what was said. You comfortable with that? Okay. Any other comments on the minutes? Other than that, Joe?
Just to say, looking up my role, Mercy Care is an NHS trust. It's as much as it's my ambition, lifelong ambition, to be part of Sefton Council, it's not actually part of Sefton Council. So.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Joe. So I'm going to take the minutes as being correct, subject to that clarification that we will see very, very quickly. Thank you. Board action log. It's there to note. Any questions or comments? Steve will take that. Your comment applies to that book as well. And the decision log. Comfortable with that? Let's go to the report of the Chief Exec.
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of items in the report which I'm not going to talk about, but either myself or other colleagues will be pleased to answer any questions the board has. I just want to draw your attention to 3 items today, if you don't mind. The first is item 11, industrial action. Since writing this report, the RCN have now confirmed that their dates for industrial action are the 15th and the 20th of December. Now, of course, when that industrial action takes place, it will be around the premise that emergency care is maintained. But of course, the definition of exactly what is covered by that has to be worked through locally. So each of our NHS trusts and their trade unions are currently working through that process and will have a clear understanding and then clear arrangements in place to manage the situation on those 2 days. Colleagues will also know that other trade unions are either out to ballot or have taken indicative ballots, so we don't expect that this will be the last incidence of industrial action that will take place in the coming months. One of the things that we have to be quite careful about here is there are lots of things that both ourselves and local NHS trusts are responsible for, but one of the things that we're not responsible for is setting the rates of pay for NHS staff. So ostensibly, we or the NHS trusts locally or the foundation trusts are the employers, are in a direct relationship with those staff, but of course the rates of pay, which is where the dispute exists, is with the government of the day. So I think it's very hard for us to say anything more than we absolutely respect and support our staff's rights to take part in this industrial action, and we are doing through our social partnership arrangements everything we can to facilitate that to effectively take place.
Thank you.
If I move on to item 12, the Social Care Discharge Fund, this was absolutely hot off the press at the time that we were finalising these papers, although it had been much trailed from previous announcements that the government had been made. But I can confirm that the money has now been confirmed. We are in a position to go ahead and spend that money, and we are in a position therefore to make a substantial difference to the discharge of patients from our hospitals this winter and the flow through the system. It is for local determination what that money would be spent on, and I have given each of our place directors a really clear instruction to go away and seek agreement with their partners in place. Now, because of the Better Care Fund, the formal agreement is effectively between us and each of the local authorities. But I do expect that agreement to be taken in full sight of all of our healthcare partners on the patch, so that everybody has effectively agreed that the investment will do what it says on the tin. Now, I wanted to highlight 2 things here. One, this is the first time, certainly in recent history, when they have distributed money based on need rather than just a straightforward fair shares formula. So we are on a weighted capitation basis about 5% of the whole NHS, and for this we have received 6.4% of the allocation. Now, in the big scheme of things, that's not huge, but actually it's really important that they've recognised the challenges that we have in this patch. And now it is my intention we can replicate the national formula to put that money down on the replication of that national formula to each of the places. But because of the lateness of this announcement, it is just possible that one of our places could come back and say, look, we just really can't spend this money because it was announced so late. There just isn't the capacity in the market for us to buy any more care packages or any more support for the discharge process. So in that instance, I will reserve the right to make minor adjustments between our places to make sure that we get the biggest impact we can on reducing the number of patients that don't need to be in hospital. And then just finally a piece of housekeeping in section 13 of the report, the third bullet point. Really important just to stress that this is not any form of subsidy to our employees. This is just the continuation of a salary sacrifice scheme that we had to regularise because some of our former CCGs provided this and some didn't. But because this scheme is open to every one of our employees, including our executive directors, I will also make sure that this is brought to the Remuneration Committee for approval. Thank you. Happy to take questions on those items or anything else that's within the report.
And then Neil.
On the subject of the social care fund, Graham, obviously we've got that thing about we need to do this really fast given the timing of it, but also we need to make sure it'll be effective, and you mentioned there being a need to agree with partners but also some kind of approval process. Are you kind of clear on the timeline we need to be on to make sure we get to where we need to get to as fast as we can, and to be able to affect the change we need before it gets any more overcrowded in the acute trusts?
So up to a certain point, I have said to the place directors, if there was a no regrets decision that you could make tomorrow, up to this percentage value of the fund, please make it with your partners so we can go ahead and secure the capacity. I have actually asked the place directors to come back to a meeting on this Thursday with an outline of how far they've got and the plans that they've got in place for two reasons. One, we can share best practice across each of the 9 places, but secondly, to really keep our foot on the pedal on this and move really quickly.
Thank you. Neil?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on item 8, I'd just like to endorse the work of CHAMPS because I had the privilege of opening the conference on the 5-year prevention strategy and spending the day, and I learnt so much. And the work that's taken place by CHAMPS with the system, and it shows how the ICS truly works, both in terms of the voluntary, the charitable, the NHS, local authorities, not just in developing the strategy, but the services that are available. And I was humbled by actually some of the lived experiences as well. And I do urge everybody, it's an easy read, to read the strategy because it helps, and the awareness raising would be so powerful. But well done, Champs.
Good point. Thanks, Neil. I think we've got Steve next.
Just on the social care discharge fund, Graham, thank you very much for your partnership orientation around this, working with councils in the way you have. But just to mention that whilst £19.2 million is welcome, it will only provide relief from the log jams that exist in hospitals. It will not provide the solutions we need. There's still a crisis in the recruitment and retention of NHS staff and social care staff, and that £19.2 million possibly won't even touch the sides. Thank you.
Can I?
It's just useful to say, isn't it? Well, we've got a workforce paper later on at which this point's been pulled out, isn't it, Steve? So we'll return to it then.
If I can just make one point, and as I said, we got these details right at the moment we were finalising these papers. One of the things that was announced was the recurrent nature and the investment into future years of some of these monies. So whilst it would be easy for us to say it's never enough, when they first announced this money, we thought the money was for this winter only, and we'd go through the same process again next winter and the winter after. The fact that they have announced the recurring nature of this money does actually help us make better decisions and will help us make more of a difference.
Thank you, Graham. Graham, just a couple of questions from me. One is on harmonising clinical commissioning policies update number 4. It's good to see that there's progress being made here. Really important for our patients and our citizens to see that equity. I don't think I've seen anything about the financial impact of this process. It would be good to, and I guess that will come in due course.
where we have already brought at least one example of the harmonisation of policy back to a previous board meeting, it has clearly included the financial consequences of that decision, and any future work we do in that area will also include that impact.
Great. It's really great work. Thank you. The other one, perhaps not so great, is EPRR. Could you just explain why we shouldn't be that worried about the 60% compliance?
If you don't mind, Chair, I'd like to defer to Anthony on that one.
Okay.
There's two levels to within that, Chairman. There's some core standards that the ICB needs to be resilient in the first year of establishment. So we are indeed, as it says in the narrative there, that we are compliant with all of those. However, there are a whole range of EPRR standards and processes which the expectation is over the forthcoming year we will begin to address in the second year. So the position that we have presented for this submission is absolutely in line with all the other 41 ICSs in the country. Nobody has declared compliance in their first year. But we are fetching a more detailed report to the next board around that.
That's clear. Thank you. Okay, people are happy to move on. Should we go to our place colleagues?
Chair, thank you. Because I've got slides, I'll present from the left. Can everybody hear me? If I look positive, that's because I'm wearing new hearing aids this week, and I was a bit concerned that I might get feedback from the mic, but all is well. So I'm Carl Marsh. I'm the place director for Warrington. On behalf of partners, I'd like to welcome you all to Warrington and welcome you to Halliwell Jones Stadium. Professor Broomhead and I were talking to an anxious Vikings fan this morning, and the only thing that I had to say was, come on the wire. So this is, it's badged as the place director report. This is not my report. This is the way we do everything in Warrington. This is collaborative. I think we got to about 30 slides at one point and then boiled them down. I have a head full of don't forget to mention. I'm sure I will forget to mention, so I will get that up front. But this has been done like we do everything, and it's collaborative. There's quite a few slides. They're in the pack, but it will be cinematic. So I will tease out a few things from each of the slide. But what we wanted to convey was, who are we? What is our relentless focus as a partnership? And what does delivery of that look like? And that's probably the most important thing, isn't it? How are we delivering today, and what's our plans moving forward? So this is our place. You could see on the previous map where Warrington sits. We are quite diverse. We're a single unitary authority. We have a rich and vibrant third voluntary community and faith sector. Alison Cullen represents them for us, sat on the board. And as part of our partnership, we have provider services, both NHS and social care services that we work closely with. We have 4 neighbourhoods, 22 wards in those neighbourhoods. You can see the colours in the centre there. I'll explain those on the next slide. And we have our NHS providers. And our 22 wards break down into 4 neighbourhoods. We have 5 primary care networks, but they work well. There's a synergy between the networks and the 4 neighbourhoods, so that is not a rate limiter for us. So they're the key things in terms of us. Just some key demography, because demography is important for us. Some key points about Warrington. We're known for our thriving economy. We have a population of circa 210,000. We're a blend of rural villages and new town developments. And we have areas of prosperity around the outside of Warrington and areas of relative deprivation in the centre. And you could see that on the previous map. Our population has risen over the years with development within Warrington, and anyone that travels through Warrington, you will see that there is industrial development. If you go down the M62 corridor, look left or right, you can see that development, and also lots of housing, lots of economic growth. And with that comes a growing and ageing population, and that gives us some of the challenges. And we've called out some of those key population growths in the bottom lozenges, and I'll tease out one of those. So our projection from 2018 to 2043 is a 98%. So that's a doubling of 85 to 89-year-olds, and 138% increase in those aged 90 plus. So you can see that gives us some challenges. What we're also seeing is a decrease in working age adults, which gives us a challenge in terms of the workforce to look after to support our growing and aging population. And so this is Warrington. These are some of the key facts about Warrington. Now, these are numbers. So when you look at Warrington, we would expect 7% of adults to have diabetes. They don't really give you the context. Is that a big number? Is that a low number? Is that about right? Is that average? But we look at those, and in the context of the next slide, we try and set those in context. But some key ones to tease out: alcohol-related hospital admissions amongst those aged under 18 are currently significantly higher in Warrington than the average England. Obesity prevalence is an issue. I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. And estimates suggest that almost 2/3, 64% of the Warrington adult population are an unhealthy weight. And also, life expectancy at 65 for both males and females remains significantly lower than England. So what we've tried to do in our health and well-being strategy is we've tried to set indicators like those in context, and then look at how do we measure compared to populations like ours and to the national average. So some of these we see that we fare well on, and we are moving in the right direction. Some we fare well on, but are moving in the wrong direction. So this gives us our focus. So that relentless focus I talked about at the beginning. And one of the things we do is we focus relentlessly on those things. And sometimes it feels that we sometimes don't celebrate the things that we do fairly well. So, and what we also see is we see a correlation across these metrics as well. So if I can give an example of that. So we compared to the England average, more people are admitted to hospital because they've fallen and ended up injured. And then if we look at the metric on the far left, physical active adults, we are below the England average. Is there a correlation there? There could be. Correlation isn't always causation, but they are the things that we are trying to understand about our population in Warrington. And so one of the things that we focus on, so these could be seen as our challenges. We try not to use the challenges word. These are the things that we are focused on together. And some of these things are universal, certainly universal across Cheshire and Merseyside. So we've talked about workforce already. That is a pressure for us. I teased out on the population, a growing Asian population, but the working age adults is decreasing. So these are the things that we are looking at in terms of how do we work together. And when you look at that life course, and when you look at the village, if Warrington was a village of 100, and when you look at these challenges, there's no single organisation that can address these on its own, and that's why we need partnership, and that's why we need Warrington together. So one of the things we've also done in understanding that context is talk to the communities that we serve. And there's a whole raft of things here. So some of these positive, and some of these the things that we know we need to focus on. And the key one for me bottom right-hand corner, I think you'd call that dark green, is I have been helped a lot, but the rest of the system is scrambled. I was passed backwards and forwards. And that's where you get the sense of partnership working, of trying to address those things. You know, people tell us, I don't want to tell the same story every time I see a different bit of the system. I don't want to see the handoff. I would like it to be seamless. They are the things we are trying to address. And so to address those, we have our vision. And our vision is Warrington is a place where we work together to create stronger neighbourhoods, healthier people, and greater equality across our communities. And we have a set of outcomes and a set of ambitions that help us deliver that. And I'll talk a little bit about how what that looks like when we get into delivery. And so what we've done to be able to help us deliver those is we've set some priorities for ourselves. Now, we set these pre-COVID. Health and Wellbeing Strategy was pre-COVID, and we've refreshed it since, and they are all still relevant. One of those pre-COVID was to help people keep their houses warm. That's as relevant, even more relevant today than it was in pre-COVID. And what we've done recently is 12 priorities. That's quite a lot to go at. Is we've restated our main effort around what we are calling the top 3. So the 12 are still important. Focus on those top 3. Low-level anxiety and depression, poverty. This started off as food poverty for children and young people, and we've now broadened it out because of the cost of living crisis that we find ourselves, and living well. And this is about the universal offer, connecting people with services. And so we have a delivery framework. Now, we call this the governance framework. I was a soldier for 24 years. The word governance makes me anxious. But this is about how we deliver. So how do we deliver as partners? And it looks complex and complicated. And that's because we are bringing together all of those services, organisations and people in Warrington together to make a difference on those priorities that we are focused on. And that gets pretty complicated. But where the magic happens starts at Health and Wellbeing Board. Vision and strategy there. And then we have the partnership board. Now that is health commissioners, social care commissioners, third sector, Health Watch, democratically elected members, all of our NHS providers. And we have oversight of the work plan. So the work plan that I was talking about earlier, this is where we have oversight of the partnership board. So when Graham was talking about the Adult Social Care Discharge Fund, this is where under the partnership board is where the work will happen. So that's already ongoing. So we already have a set of schemes that are aimed at supporting discharge. And one of the things that we have is a thing called a Better Care Fund, which the Adult Social Care Fund will go into. But we have a Better Care Fund that has a pot of 44 million that we can make decisions against. Those decisions can be made by the ICB and the local authority, but we have partners in the room to help us shape those decisions. And one of the things we also have is what we call an adaptive reserve, a small pot, just under 3 million, that we can use to support discharge and make sure people are cared for in the optimal setting. And here's some examples of those things that we are working on together at pace, that are the similar sorts of things that the adult social care funding will be pointed at. And so we're on this journey, and we've assessed ourselves on that journey, and we've used a thing called the Thriving Places document, and it goes from emerging all the way to thriving. Thriving is where you have delegated budgets in place and full autonomy, and we've assessed ourselves as not far off thriving, and I think we are pretty hard on ourselves sometimes, and that feels like a fair assessment of where we are. And more importantly, we know what we have to do next to get to thriving. And we've had some really good support on that from the local government association. We've all been involved in a population health programme in Warrington as representatives of the ICB, and we've been doing peer review with places like us that are on that journey as well. And then this is why we do it, because the challenges that we are trying to address are complex, and we need to do those things together. A really good example is the vaccine programme. No single organisation delivered that at scale and pace. That was partnership across Warrington. And then another one is our urgent community response. So that you can refer patients to there, and they will be seen within 2 hours. So we take patients from general practice, and we also take them from North West Ambulance Service. So you get a sense of the partnerships that we are trying to develop. And so that's the end of my slides. But what I wanted to do is just hand over to Becky from one of our provider colleagues, who's going to talk us through a resident story that teases out how important it is for services to work together.
Good morning. My name's Rebecca Emery, and I am. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to feedback one of our patient stories. I'm a children's physiotherapist with Bridgewater, based in Warrington, but also I'm team lead across physio and occupational therapy. So the story we've got this morning is a young girl called Elspeth Calvert. Unfortunately, she should have been with us today, but due to the complex nature of her condition, she has been poorly, so she's quite disappointed because she would have liked to come and present alongside and to sort of spoken her voice for herself. But I'll do my best to be her advocate and share that. Okay. So we have quite a large neurological sort of caseload within Warrington, and we have quite a high number of children with degenerative conditions. So our job, particularly in therapies, is to help them to achieve their potential, sort of their functional independence and their academic potential to feed into their overall outcomes in terms of life experiences. So this was a young lady who has spinal muscular atrophy type 2. She was referred to our physiotherapy service in 2015 as a baby who was behind in general milestones. So quite often we'll get children coming to us with developmental delay, and it's our job to find out sort of what's going on with that child. So at the moment she's known to physiotherapy, occupational therapy, and also respiratory physiotherapy. She's also known to many wider services within Bridgewater, so she's known to the wheelchair service. She's also known to social services, occupational therapy within the local authority. And she's a child who's cared for jointly across the acute services, but including Alder Hey. So we work very closely in the community with the Alder Hey staff. So the condition she has is degenerative, so she will lose skills as she gets older. And the condition affects the proteins that send the messages to the muscles, so it is progressive weakness that she has. She had spinal rod surgery in July in the summer 22, and we have been working with her in the community post-operatively. Okay, so we spent some time with Elspeth and her parents to gain feedback about her experience of the community services within Bridgewater. And she's a very articulate and intelligent young lady, and she gave us some nice constructive feedback. So the first thing she said was that the staff were all very nice and kind, and what she appreciated was the staff working at the right pace for her. So looking at her as an individual, listening to her wants and needs about what she wants for her body and her life, and then putting that into a practical nature that we can implement in agreement with parents. So the feedback that we had from Mum was that the staff that engaged with Elspeth and the family were very professional, that the staff are knowledgeable and well informed in terms of nice guidance and standards of care. And again, that we worked with Elspeth as an individual holistically, but not trying to impose our own wants and needs on Elspeth. She had a voice in terms of what she wanted from us. Okay, so in terms of any negative feedback about their experience, what Elspeth shared with us that things can change. So for example, at the moment she has sore hips. So we see children on a clinical needs basis. So when we see a child, if they've got everything in place, we will then see them for a review. So if their needs change and children become sore or they have a certain difficulty, then what they want is to be able to access the service in between those reviews so that they can have that targeted help when it's appropriate for them. So that's something that we're working on. And in terms of those regular reviews for equipment, as children grow and as their needs change, then obviously we need to adapt that and adapt for growth and any physical changes that we need to. In terms of parent feedback, that the parents of this particular caseload are generally very well informed about conditions, about charities and organisations outside of the NHS where they can access support. So parents talk a lot between themselves, which is generally very positive, but parents are aware of any disparities across the country that are in terms of service delivery from trusts. So they keep us on our toes in that area. So parents are always keen to have lots of frequency of reviews and making sure that staff are available for those issues and those problems as they come up. And what they have noticed also are that there are some disparities in terms of funding for things like hydrotherapy and certain pieces of equipment. Okay. So in terms of patient involvement, how was the patient involved in their care or treatment decisions? This young lady in particular is very actively involved in her treatment decisions. So she gives us guidance, like I said before, on what's important for her. So that's not just in terms of the physiotherapy programme and the standing programme that she has in place, but also the equipment decisions. So we've arranged for her to have a sleep system to help slow down sort of contractures within her body. We also talk very openly with her in terms of how we engage with other services. So we work very closely with other services within Bridgewater, for example, wheelchair services. And we also work very closely within the schools. So at the beginning of each academic year, we go out and we teach and cascade the management programmes to the teaching staff and the teaching assistants within the classroom. So as part of that piece of work, physiotherapy and occupational therapy will talk about what should be encouraged for that particular child, also what should be discouraged in terms of moving and handling or positioning, to get the most out of their curriculum. So we work very closely with the schools and the Senkos as well. In terms of surgery, just as I touched on before, we have to be very close contact with Alder Hey or Manchester in some circumstances, and we need that ongoing dialogue with the tertiary centres. So we spend lots of time giving explanations to children about why we're doing something. What Elspeth fed back is that it's really important that children understand what you're doing and why, because quite often some of the things that we're doing in terms of activities or sort of treatment modalities, they can be uncomfortable. Things like stretching, positioning, all of those kind of things. So the child really needs to have a good understanding as to why we're doing that, so that they are compliant, informed and cooperative. Okay. And then in terms of lessons learned for us from this piece of work in engaging with this family, Elspeth gave some very pertinent feedback and said, she asked the question, why are all the letters about me addressed to my parents? So one of the things that we're thinking about is how we can incorporate the voice of the child in terms of communicating our clinical information to that young person, particularly where, you know, they've got good understanding. So that's something that we're looking at within therapies, you know, and to be able to say to a child, well done for your achievements in therapies in your healthcare this year, and these are the things that we want to help you work on in the next year, as well as being able to give a comprehensive report to parents and to the adults around that child. So that's something that we're giving sort of some consideration within children's specialist services. So the other thing that parents fed back to us, that for a child like this who's got a very complex condition, lifelong and probably life-limiting condition, that having all that information from all the services in a very joined up way is really helpful. Mum said that when she first got the diagnosis and she was starting to get letters for appointments, she had to sit down and write a spider diagram of all the services, of who did what, how they interact, all their contact details, and that was really tricky for her. So in terms of all the services that are involved, if we can collaborate and put that information together, then I think that would improve the patient early experience in terms of that early diagnosis, and just giving them a helping hand along that journey. So that's it from me really at the moment, but I'll be happy to discuss anything further and take any questions when we finish the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. I'm really disappointed that Elspeth couldn't
I know.
make it today, but it's good that I believe she's getting well.
She is on the mend, and she has specifically asked that if there's another opportunity, then she'd be delighted to come.
We'd be delighted to see you, so let's make sure that's organised. I think we've got something that we'd like to give to Elspeth. We believe she's an ardent Wolves fan.
She is a rugby fan, yes.
So hopefully she'll enjoy these.
So Rebecca, thanks very much for that powerful story. We do need to work harder on integration of services. Really sorry Elspeth can't be here. She works very hard to come to every Wolves game, and just on behalf of the club, there's tickets there for any game she wants to come to with a meal, tour the change room, meet the players. Could even be the coach, and a shirt.
Oh, that's lovely.
Inspiring, hey. I should have said that there's going to be a fire alarm at 11 o'clock. So don't panic, it's a test. Right. Shall we go to the Executive Director of Nursing and Care update report, Chris?
Thank you, Chairman. So the report today will focus on 3 areas. It will outline the framework for quality and governance assurance, around the work that is underway to ensure safety within our urgent and emergency care pathway, and then a workforce position for Cheshire and Merseyside, and for that I'll hand over to Chris Moser, our Chief People's Officer. So within the paper, it defines the understood quality governance framework and how essential that is in managing the new and emerging risks to quality and safety of our services. So within the paper, it highlights the framework for quality and governance assurance that was published by the National Quality Board in April 21. And that focused on the management of risks and improving quality through integrated care systems. The report details how the integrated care system, through strengthening of collaboration and partnership, will be working across health and social care. And the management of risk and quality is layered, and it's aligned to organisational operating frameworks, and it will include provider quality governance within our provider organisations, the place governance arrangements for quality within our place systems, then within the integrated care system, and finally within regional and national quality governance. The second part of the paper, excuse me, focuses on safety within our urgent emergency care pathway and the work that we are doing that is underway to ensure that this is maintained. So the focus is around maintaining safety, as I've said, within the urgent care pathway. And I'm sure you'll agree that it's paramount of importance, particularly during periods of intense demand. So there is work at this moment in time that's looking at both regionally and within our integrated care system level. It's taking place to ensure that there's a way of understanding and acting upon increasing risk at the system level and to support these workings at the front line and take appropriate action to mitigate and control the risks at organisational level. So we are working with our partners to ensure that we maintain that safety within our urgent and care pathway, and further work will be developed as we progress. So I'm going to hand over now to Chris Samosa to focus on the workforce element of the paper. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Just by means of introduction, I just wanted to start by saying that the NHS developed its national people plan prior to the pandemic, and that was about addressing the workforce challenges across the whole of the NHS. But in Cheshire and Mersey, we took the key components of that plan and produced a local plan across health and social care, recognising that one part of our system can absolutely impact on the other. But we all know that the workforce challenges that we face continue, and they're not getting better quickly. And you'll see in the paper that we produced today our workforce priorities across the whole of Cheshire and Merseyside, but I'll just focus on a number of those. So our NHS providers report that they've got in excess of 3,000 vacancies at the moment, while social care, domiciliary care are reporting around 7,000 vacancies. That's about 10% of their total workforce. So this inevitably increases the use of bank, agency and other temporary staffing measures that starts to then have the potential to impact in terms of quality, but also the financial pressures on our system. We know that many staff in social care aspire to work in the NHS, where often the terms and conditions and pay are much greater than that they have across social care. And we know that there are challenges across social care. 19% of the workforce still are paid through 0 hours contracts, and many on below the real living wage. So that presents a real challenge to all of our sector. It's therefore really important that the actions that we take to improve our NHS supply of workforce does not result in unintended consequences for our colleagues in social care and indeed across primary care. So I just wanted to highlight some of the work that we're doing to support improvements in terms of our workforce supply. And these are across both health and social care. So we've commissioned and worked very closely with our colleagues in the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority and in Warrington and Cheshire Local Enterprise Partnership to work with our trusts and our social care providers to encourage youngsters and people in our communities to consider careers in health and social care. We're working very much to make sure that we can offer placements to our students, again, across health and social care. Often social care can't take placements for student nurses because they don't have that clinical infrastructure for supervision, and therefore we've created some partnerships which will allow staff to flex between the two. We're also working very closely with the Prince's Trust to encourage youngsters, perhaps from more deprived areas, to consider careers in health and social care and to give them exposure to work placements and some of the training that our staff enjoy. But we also recognise that we need to work with the Department of Work and Pensions so that they've got up-to-date information that they can give to local people who are looking for careers perhaps in the sector. And therefore we make sure that those staff have regular sessions in terms of training and that they're really up to date in terms of vacancies that we've got. We're working with a range of our education providers to encourage those students who are perhaps undertaking their T-level qualifications to come into careers across health and social care. And again, it's very much working with them to create placements, but also to create the right and safe environment for youngsters to enter into our sector. The board paper presents some details on other initiatives that we're undertaking. But when we do train and recruit staff, we also need to make sure that we keep them. You'll see in the paper that turnover is currently around 14.5% across our NHS providers, but it's as high as 26% in social care. And that varies depending on the part of Cheshire and Mersey where people work. We know that more registered nurses leave within the first 2 years following their training than in each of the subsequent 2 to 10 years. So it's a real challenge for us. And in our allied health professional workforce, 49% of those who leave the NHS are under 34 years of age. And this provides real challenges to us, not only in sustaining our workforce, but also in terms of the quality of service we can provide to our patients, and also the financial impact across health and social care. So what have we done to address some of this? We've employed a new Cheshire and Merseyside retention lead to share best practice, to explore some collaborative approaches to development, to having preceptorship programs so that we really support our youngsters and our newly qualified staff. But we've also secured some funding to create what we're calling our legacy mentors, which are using those staff who've worked in our sector for many, many years to support these youngsters who are now starting their careers. So I think it's really, really positive, and make sure that we see the benefit of all of that experience. We've also employed an experienced senior nurse excuse me, to work with social care, to support the registered nurses in that sector, making sure that they've got access to really good quality training and development that our staff in the NHS have access to. And we're also monitoring the impact of both of these initiatives in terms of turnover, retention and satisfaction of our staff. And it is really important that we need to ensure the health and well-being of our staff remains a priority for us, as we know that they're working through many, many challenging circumstances. But despite all of the services that we have available to our staff, our sickness levels are still considerably higher than the rest of the country, at around 6%. And again, we know that this creates a fragility in our workforce when you apply that to the vacancies that we've got, as well as sickness absence. Over the next 2 weeks, we're starting a programme with our partners in Greater Manchester to look at how we can support better those staff who are the victims of domestic violence, and to ensure that they feel safe and have got access to a range of supporting work. We're also looking at how we can support staff better through a range of networks, particularly those who share a protected characteristic. But it is really important that we don't just take some short-term measures to address the workforce challenges. And so we need to develop our short, our medium and our long-term plans. We're working with Skills for Care and ADAS, and they're going to produce place-based workforce plans for social care, and then we'll overlay that with our operational planning from our NHS providers. And we're looking now to move from annual workforce plans to those for 5, 10 and 15 years. And we're working with Health Education England to make sure that as we align our need for our future workforce, that they're training enough people and that our supply is coming through. The paper also outlines the need for us to support colleagues in wider primary care sector who are looking at developing new roles. We're working with them to do some collaborative recruitment whilst they're really dealing with the challenges of an ageing workforce. And again, our work with providers and social care should not compromise the workforce in primary care. So the workforce of the future will need to be much more flexible. We know that people entering the workforce now are looking for different career opportunities whilst maximising the benefits of technology. So there is much more detail in the paper, but I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. Questions or comments? Anne?
Yeah, just going back to Chris Douglas's paper on risks in A&E departments. I wouldn't, I'm sure Chris didn't mean to make it sound like it was kind of easy to mitigate those risks, but just to make the point, it's very challenging to mitigate risks when we're now in an unprecedented situation. We've never been there before, where we've got far more than 100% occupancy in most acute trusts. That means there are more patients in the hospital who've been admitted to beds than there are beds to put them into. Clearly that causes all sorts of issues around how to manage those patients, and with the consequent impact on ambulance handover delays, and therefore ambulance response times. And also, you know, then linking it into what Chris Samosa's just said about recruitment and retention. You know, not only is that not, you know, a pretty awful patient experience, it's a pretty awful staff experience as well. So, you know, this sheer pressure that's going on, you know, in the acute sector and across all, you know, similar things across all sectors isn't really the best recommendation for people to be recruited to our posts nor to be retained in those posts. So, you know, this is all linking together to create a bit of a perfect storm.
Thank you, Anne. Other questions before I ask a couple? So, Chris, on the quality assurance system, you ask there's a recommendation about frequency of reporting back to this meeting. I think there's a need for us to understand how we get assurance about the effectiveness of that governance. It's complicated, huge agenda, and so could you put some thought about that question about how do we know those arrangements are effective, and that will help us understand how frequently further reporting needs to happen to this board. Quality and safety is the single most important issue for us, so it feels as though something needs to come to the board pretty frequently. But that specific question?
Yes, certainly. This was to introduce the quality and outcome framework and how we're going to work with that within the organisation. So we will be developing that. We'll take that through our quality and performance committee, and use that as well through our system quality group that we have too.
That's great, Chris. My specific question is, how do we know those arrangements are looking and finding the right risks and issues and then acting on them? If you could just ponder that and then perhaps come back to this board in January with seeking to help us understand that assurance question. What controls have we got in place? What data are we going to use to understand those systems are effective?
Certainly.
Thank you. Any questions? Steve?
Sorry to use the word crisis twice in the meeting, but we do seem to have a perma-crisis around workforce planning, both in social care and in the NHS. I welcome the paper and welcome the approach. I mean, clearly there's going to be a lot of industrial disputes and difficulty going forward. The vote of the Royal College of Nursing for the first time in their history will all need to manage that in the middle of a winter crisis, and our winter plan will need to deal with that. So I welcome the approach, and it's a time when other people are arguing for greater productivity in the NHS, such as 7-day working, and even somebody's even suggesting charging to see GPs. So I just wonder how, you know, we're going to handle this, and it'll be done very much at a partner level and at a place-based level. But as a board, how we're going to handle the workforce challenges that all of us have, as demonstrated by this paper going forward.
Thanks, Steve. Great question. Chris, do you want to give us?
Thank you. We have in place the Cheshire and Mersey People Board, which is now much more strategic and has greater partnership from across local authorities as well as our providers. It is very much about making sure that the actions of one part of the system don't compromise the actions of another. But I think our fundamental starting point has to be about having really robust workforce plans and making sure that they're owned across the system. But you're right, the real focus will need to be at a place level.
Chris, if I could just ask a supplementary. So we've seen in the report that one of the most significant issues is turnover of staff. You know, a startling statistic about more staff leaving the first 12, more nursing staff leaving the first 12 months, but then it goes 2 to 10, I think you said. That's, it feels, I'm not sure what right adjective is it, but that's a pretty, you know, poor state of affairs. And you list in the paper some items around retention. Given that it's far easier to keep people, or should be far easier to keep people than recruit them, especially from abroad, what is it that this board could do to support the organisation's retention efforts? Is there something we could do? Let me give you a thought. One of the most successful campaigns around retention in NHS's history was Improving Working Lives, which was about 15 years ago, was it? Long time ago. Is there something akin to that we could do?
Yeah, so the people plan and the retention lead is very much sort of aligned to the Improving Working Lives initiative. So it's very much looking with groups of staff, what are the things that would keep them? So whether it's flexible working, whether it's continuous professional development, our rostering programme seem very, very crucial in terms of staff's willingness to come and work in the sector. But it's about making sure we look after their health and well-being as well. So there's lots of great examples. We've got 2 exemplar sites in Merseyside and Luft in terms of trialling some of this work, and then it's very much through the retention lead now we've created a forum of sharing some of that best practice, but it's really important that they're not just seen as an initiative, that we actually monitor their success. So I'm happy to bring some of those back, but I think the support that collectively across health and social care would be very welcome.
Thank you. Paul?
Thanks, Chair. I was very pleased to see that low pay was highlighted as one of the biggest challenges we've got in social care. The context for my authority is that the extra money that's coming for social care, which is welcome, that 1.2 million, doesn't cover the potential overspend we've got. And in Sefton, we can't afford to be contracting with our providers to pay the real living wage, which we'd like to do. We're told that would cost an extra £8 million, which we simply haven't got. That's and that's against us having a huge hole in our finances this year, caused by the energy crisis and inflation. So the system is really strained to the limit. I would hope that we could look at a local level for some cross-budgetary assistance, maybe from at a local level to support social care.
Graham, do you want to give a view?
It's a really difficult question, Paul. So the BCF was designed to bind us together to effectively allow us to co-fund and co-develop solutions. One of the things it was not designed to do was for the NHS to cross-subsidise local government or local government to cross-subsidise the NHS. What we have to do is we have to have find that sweet spot of mutual interest to make this work, but we can't start with a policy of cross-subsidisation.
I think we can be imaginative, though, in how we do things.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this hugely important report? No. Okay, so moving to the recommendations. Note the contents of the report and request additional information assurances appropriate. We've heard from both Chris's that there's further assurances and information that's requested. Agree frequency of the future reporting requirements. I'm going to suggest it's monthly until we get into a position we know what a better frequency is, given the importance of this work. Are you comfortable with that? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Should we move on to finance report? Claire?
Yes, thank you. So in the month 7 financial position, there's quite a lot of detail in the report, which I won't repeat, but just to draw out some of the key highlights. So we're reporting a £56.8 million deficit at month 7, which is quite a distance away from where we had hoped to be at this point of the year by around about £32 million. So we are off the plan that we'd set ourselves at this point. And I think the 3 key things that are driving that are the operational pressures and workforce pressures that we've already discussed today, and the energy inflation and general inflation levels, and finally a difficulty and a set of challenges in delivering the efficiency plans and the levels of efficiencies that are expected of us in the NHS to deliver. So those 3 things are the key factors really in influencing that position, which is off plan. We are continuing to report a position that we will recover that by the end of the year, but The report in front of you sets out the fact that there is about £74 million worth of risk in that, and that risk figure hasn't moved since last month, but it is increasingly crystallised in a number of organisations. So we have 5 organisations we are actively monitoring and escalating our discussions with around their financial position, and Graham and I are meeting with all of them regularly, and I think, Raj, you're meeting with 1 or 2 as well. So we are very conscious that there is a lot of risk in this financial position. There are, as I've reported in the paper, a number of conditions that we will need to comply with if we did deteriorate our forecast, and those conditions have been set nationally, and that will bring with it a whole host of restrictions that we would need to comply with, both from the system level but also individual organisation level. So we're obviously working very, very, very hard across the whole system to prevent that happening and to find all the mitigations that we possibly can to manage these risks and to deliver the plan as we agreed at the beginning of the year. So I'm going to pause there and open it up to questions. I think they're the key points I wanted to raise.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions or comments on this? Neil?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I'm not sure quite whether we're repeating some of what we've repeated before, but in the position, I mean, the 2 trusts in particular, they've got a significant variance at month 7, but you're showing a forecast that they're going to get back to plan. That seems highly unlikely. Are there actions with those organisations to do that, or is it just a leap of faith at this point in time?
So are you referring to Chester?
And Luft.
And Luft. Okay, so yes. No individual organisation or system can depart from their forecast position until that is agreed through a protocol process with the national team. So those are conversations we're having at the moment with the organisations concerned and NHSI, our regulators. With those 2 organisations specifically, we're regularly meeting with the organisations to look at their recovery actions that they're taking. In the case of Chester, their risk that they are describing at the moment, their unmitigated risk, is around about 25 million away from plan. They're considering a number of actions that will mitigate some of that, but we don't believe that they will be able to mitigate all of it. And the latest assessment is a £17 million departure from their plan. As a system, we will need to consider whether we have opportunities to improve the financial position elsewhere in the system in order to have a net nil impact. And it's those levels of conversation that we're having with wider partners in the system and with our regulators. In the case of Liverpool University Teaching Hospitals, we are again actively discussing with them not only the plan for this financial year, but it's an organisation that's obviously got some significant underlying financial difficulties as well, and they are preparing a recovery plan that looks at the next 3 years for them, and that's coming to us at the end of this week, and Raj and Graham are going to meet with the organisation at the end of this week. So lots of active conversations, not necessarily a fully crystallised recovery plan for Luft yet for this year, but it's still subject to discussion.
I understand the constraints we've got, but when do you think we'll see the actual forecast out in terms of organisations as opposed to the forced position?
So they do report unmitigated risk numbers, which is the 74 million in the plan. But Graham and I are meeting with the national team on Wednesday of this week on our financial position, and as part of that, we'll be talking about timeframes of any actioning of the protocol. So it will definitely have to be either in month 8 or month 9, because there is an expectation that no organisation will deteriorate its financial position in quarter 4.
Okay, good. The sooner we get there, the sooner we know what we're dealing with. And the other question for me then is in those negotiations, is there any way we can get ability to incentivise organisations to come into surplus? And I know that just locks the money, the cash in the balance sheet, but is there any way that we could move the money around in contracts to maybe move the monies and reverse it next year so it unlocks the money for those trusts? So there's a way of incentivising organisations to generate services.
That's something we're absolutely looking at, yeah. We're trying to think through those, you know, and that was we had a chief exec's workshop on financial sustainability a week or so ago, and one of the key areas that we discussed was how do we incentivise organisations to go further, particularly those that are reporting either surplus plan positions already or are reporting that they will deliver their plan and have delivered CIPs to support that. So they're very much the system-wide conversations we are having and need to continue to have to identify what levers, incentives we've got at our disposal within the system. You know, we've not yet finalised those
The only
things.
way I can think of to unlock cash for next year is about moving contract values in a way which is, but that's another issue. Just on a point we touched on earlier, if we look at these and the performance reports and we look at the organisations and we look at all the indicators, I'm getting a picture about the indicator but not the picture of the organisation, because when I look at agency spend, I think Mid-Cheshire is about 21 million. When I look at workforce issues and well, it would be interesting to have a dashboard by organisation so we see the totality of the organisation's challenges. Because if you've got a financial problem, you've got agency, you've got sickness, you've got all sorts of challenges. An organisational dashboard would give me a real understanding of which organisations need wider support, not just about finance, not just about workforce, but about fetching it all together so that we can understand. And I know it's been difficult this year, but for next year, I would certainly like to see that so that we can actually address the whole issue, not just the individual issues.
Yeah, I know it's something that the board have talked about, and integrated performance reporting I think is something that we definitely need to develop. In the meantime, I have got some dashboard type information from a purely finance and workforce lens that I can share with the board that we're using with our regulators as a way of looking at our organisation, so we can share that.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Neil. Let's lock that down as an action, I think, for the new financial year. We'd expect to see balanced scorecards for each of our organisations, so we can do that triangulation of the different information that comes to us. But if there are no other questions, I've got just a couple on to comment, Claire. I really like in your executive some of the key performance indicators presentation. That was in response, I think, to conversations at the board last month or maybe the previous month. Really good. That's clear. That's helpful, I think. Just some specifics. One specific really is about the ICB as an organisation's position. We can see a bit behind plan. And then as we support and attempt to influence our organisations across the ICS in terms of the, I'm going to call it the quality of their financial plans, and really specifically focusing in on the recurrent cost improvements that we need to ensure that good quality services happen. We need to be an exemplar in that, and we can see our position in the ICB as not being great. Can give me a view about whether you think the position around recurrent CIPs is going to improve for the...
I absolutely agree with you. I think the year-to-date deficit in the ICB position is as a result of a gap we took on in the plan on behalf of the system at the beginning of the year, which we will mitigate by the end of the year through looking at maybe slippage or non-recurrent measures to get us over the line. But having said that, you know, the point you make about our recurrent CIP delivery in the ICB is absolutely right. Whilst it's not yet showing us an overspend yet this year, it will absolutely pop out next year, and it is an area that we absolutely do need to improve on, and are taking measures internally to do that as we bring together the 9 organisations into one to create a single PMO, a single sort of programme of work. So you're right, and it's an area we do need to improve on, and we're focused on that.
Okay, so we expect to see progress in future months?
Yeah, we've got, yeah, absolutely, yeah. In the coming months, we would expect to see progress.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to the report is here for noting. No further comments?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Should we go to the quality and performance report? Who's going to lead? Anthony.
Okay, thanks, Chairman. I understand the other pack is quite comprehensive in terms of a range of indicators, and there is a covering narrative in that, but I'll try to pull some of that together and particularly pick up on some of the conversations that we've already had this morning, really. So if I look first at physical urgent care, as people have reported, it is a system that's under extreme pressure right now. Some of the salient points I'd pull out from there is that despite the fact that primary care is seeing more activity than it has done in the previous year, the amount of patients that are attending our A&E departments, or the amount of patients that are being admitted into hospital, is actually lower than it was the previous year. But the occupancy level that Anne referred to earlier is really a product of the number of patients that are resident within acute setting that no longer require that care. Within the paper it talks that over 20% of the hospital beds are occupied by patients of that nature, and actually the real figure as of this morning is 22.9. And to contextualise that, that's over 1,300 patients that are sat in our acute bed stock right now. And the figure was about half that 12 months ago, so there's been a real significant change. And that's biting in a number of areas that people have talked about. Clearly that is what the 500 million that Graham referenced earlier is there to tackle, certainly in the short term. And there's a further paper in the pack around winter care, which I'll incorporate some of the answers into that as well. Some of the things that we see in terms of the impact is it is that the safety of the ED itself, the A&E department, and the measures that we have to take under extreme pressure, but also it does impact on ambulance handovers. One of the things that we are doing next week is, in collaboration with North West Ambulance Service, we are launching the Cheshire and Mersey Ambulance Handover Programme. It's part of a national programme, but it's focused at ICB level. And because we're in Warrington, it'd be remiss not to point out that the Chief Executive of Warrington Hospital is the senior responsible officer for that programme for Cheshire and Mersey. And that is deliberate. You know, we do see varying degrees of ambulance handover performance across various acute sites. And I don't think there's any acute site that we would say is having an easier demand than others. But Warrington is one of the areas where actually they're managing to turn around ambulances on average at the higher end across Cheshire and Mersey. So I know Simon's keen to play his part in that, and everyone to understand learning not just across Cheshire and Mersey but across the wider ICB patch. As I said, you know, there are a number of mitigations which I'll cover within the separate paper around winter. But in terms of elective care, on the whole, if we were looking at elective care purely through the lens of long waiting patients, and most of those long waiting patients is part of the consequences of a cessation of elective activity during the 2 years of lockdown under COVID. We do have confidence that by the end of March this year, we should have a maximum of 78 weeks, 18 months for elective surgery across Cheshire and Mersey. But there are two main providers within that where we're seeing the most challenge. That's Liverpool University Hospitals and the Countess of Chester. Now, Cheshire and Mersey has got a very robust elective programme, which is managed underneath the Cheshire and Mersey Acute and Specialist Trust Collaborative. And through that, we are actioning mutual aid to those providers, allowing patients to travel across Cheshire and Mersey to access their surgery quicker, or having prioritised access to new capacity that we bring online, either through the independent sector or new capacity that's being created on acute hospital sites. So whilst it's a day-by-day tracking that we're around there, there is the expectation that we will get there by the end of March. Inevitably, that will lead on to a further set of challenges next year. The objective is to try and reduce maximum waiting times to no more than a year. So that would be by March 2024. But within that, we recognise that overall waiting lists, both within Cheshire and Mersey and nationally, are increasing. So the real push is to increase our activity levels and some of the efficiencies that Steve mentioned earlier in how we do that, making maximum use of our theatres, etc., so that we can start to treat more patients in the same time frame and reduce or tackle what is at this point in time a growing total waiting list. If I turn to cancer, cancer again is a service where we're seeing quite an increase in referrals for suspected cancer. doesn't necessarily mean that more diagnosis of cancer is taking place. But after the relaxation of some of the lockdown measures in COVID, we did fully expect to see a bit of an increase in referrals for cancer, but the thought was that after some period they would start to abate. That hasn't happened. We're still running at about 120% of referrals for suspected cancer than we saw pre-COVID. And therefore, again, underneath the CMAST auspices, we've got the Cancer Alliance that's managing on that behalf of Cheshire and Mersey, and we're actively managing where the pressure points are within that, with the objective of trying to reduce the current backlog down to a level by the end of March, which will allow delivery of the 62-day standard, but also how we are deploying some of the increased diagnostic services and capacity that we've got. So it's going. That one still remains quite a challenge for us to achieve that March, but at this point in time, the way we're going, we are demonstrating good progress. But we are having to face up to the reality that this level of suspected cancer referrals is likely to be with us for some time, and we need to really understand what the longer term arrangements are in terms of capacity. In terms of mental health, I think, again, what we're seeing there is absolute increased demand and complexity of cases coming through significantly spiked up following lockdown. And the headline measure, I guess, that we see within there at 4.1 within the paper is that pre-COVID patients that were requiring some sort of bedded facility predominantly would have been found that bedded facility within the Cheshire and Mersey boundary. And unfortunately, that's no longer the case, and a number of our patients are having to be transported to various corners of the country to receive the necessary standard of treatment that they need. And that's not unique to Cheshire and Mersey. It very much is one of regional and national focus in how we coordinate the provision of those services. Nothing that will be a surprise to Dr. Rafferty. But there is indeed an action plan and a capacity plan to try and bring some of that back on form. And maybe at a future meeting we might want to discuss how we're doing against that, or through the Performance and Quality Committee. So I'll pause there, Chairman, for questions, but I guess just picking up on some of the that final question from Neil, really, in terms of the integrated reporting, absolutely pick up in terms of the timescales that we just set ourselves as a board. But just to highlight in terms of, we have a facilitated workshop taking place on Monday next week, where we're looking to develop the integrated quality and performance dashboards with lots of people around this semicircle table at this point in time, providers and voluntary sector and public health partners, so that we can make some immediate changes to the report that you currently see, which will be evident in the next report, but then we'll take it one step further to incorporate much more workforce and finance into that as well.
Thanks, Anthony.
Just to add to what Anthony just said about cancer services, so what we've seen is probably near a 30% increase now, so we're at 130% of the number of cancer referrals that we got in 1920, so before the pandemic. But what's interesting is the pick-up rate hasn't gone down, so it's not like we've got all these referrals and then the conversion to cancer has gone down. It hasn't, it stayed the same, which is, it's 6%. It's a surprisingly small number. And the range in that between tumour sites goes from 2.5% to 39% for different tumour sites. So we've got a real, whole range of different numbers in there. But the point of the comment really is it means that we've got 30% more people who need to be diagnosed and treated. So whilst, one thing about the 2-week rule and the outpatient consultation, it's all of the treatment that then goes on. So we're seeing a kind of 30% increase in the number of people who are on a cancer pathway, which obviously from a capacity point of view, we've got the same or perhaps even less capacity than we had before the pandemic because of the workforce issues. And yet we've got this massive, urgent increased workload to deal with. So again, another challenge, but just to, some very stark numbers in there.
Thanks, Anne. That's really helpful. If I could I suggest that will it be the Cancer Alliance who's able to come to this board to explain to us the capacity and demand modelling that they've done and the mitigations around capacity that we could see, firstly to deliver the March expectation, but ongoing into 23-24. that a useful thing for them to come and do? I'm looking for, yeah. Great. So if we could hear from them, if we could give them an agenda item slot next January, next meeting, be really important to hear. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Tony?
Yeah, thanks, Raj, and thanks, Anthony, for the report. Under urgent care, it's paragraph 1.9 to 1.11, you indicate that, first of all, to manage some of the current pressures, there's the opening of 130 to 205 beds, which is positive, but are you in a position, or will you be in a position, to evaluate the impact of that on the pressures in accident and emergency? Because when you get down to 1.11, you point out that the key risk, and we've discussed it several times today, the key risk to delivery remains workforce recruitment and retention. Can we get a balanced position at some point on whether those beds have actually made a significant difference, or whether we're still struggling with the significant impact of workforce?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's always a hard one to lay at the foot of one indicator, but the chosen one at the minute is that non-criteria to reside. It's the number of patients that are residing within acute setting. Now, some of these beds, the 205, are actually still within the acute setting, because it's the trust that have been able to expand their capacity, so it doesn't change that indicator, but clearly that has offset some of the risk in not having that capacity and the overheating within ED and ambulance turnaround. So we can look to try and triangulate a way in which that shows. In those areas where out of acute hospital beds have been provided, then we would clearly expect to see a direct correlation between the reduction of non-criteria to reside and the creation of that capacity. That capacity has been coming online and has accelerated predominantly on the acute sites faster than thought. The community beds are probably coming online during December and through out. But again, it links back into the use of this 500 million, or rather the 29 million of the Cheshire and Mersey money, which absolutely Graham has given an extremely strong steer on. This absolutely has to have an impact on the non-criteria to reside, and that will be part of the challenge that we have to take forward.
And for Tony, if I heard something else in your question, which I'd capture by the soundbite about safe staffing levels. But that's what I think the question is about: is how do we, given all the pressures, corridor care, etc. I'm going to try and use the right words. Within those circumstances, how do we assure ourselves of what can be done is being done, and that principally will be our trust boards have got effective oversight over the escalation risk that's in there. I think in your paper, Chris, you talk about this issue specifically. Chris, is there anything more you want to say than what you said before about paper? Let's just use the word safe staffing.
From a safe staffing point of view, I mean, each organisation does provide to their board on a monthly basis their staffing figures, but that, I don't think it would give you the level of detail that you're looking for. It would just tell you the percentage numbers within there. I think the work that we're doing with the system to look at how we ensure that we monitor safely within our urgent and emergency care pathway will bring some more further detail out.
Tony, is that looking for?
It is right. It's just to take the simple point that somebody might read into this. So you've opened a lot more beds now, but yet you've got a staffing crisis. How has that been balanced out, and is the staffing crisis hampering the effective use of those additional beds? So I think it's something we ought to monitor as best we can going forward.
Okay, thank you. Papers here for noting. If no further questions, we'll move on to the digital strategy. And Rowan, John.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. I'll let John make his way up to the lectern. We took a very considered decision at the inception of the ICS to put digital within the Medical Directorate, because having that very clear clinical purpose in everything that we do with our digital work is essential. And I'd like to think, and John will take us through this, with the extensive engagement we've had on developing this strategy, what shines through is that it is focused on the patient and indeed the citizen as part of our population, because our strategy is not just here to treat those who need care, but wherever we can, keep people well, understand the risk they live with, and look to intervene far earlier in a journey that might otherwise end up at an ED, and we all understand the pressures that we're facing in this. A central thread that will come through when John presents is our commitment that the health intelligence we have is turned into action, both for the population and the patients that we care for. So I'll hand over to John Llewellyn now to walk colleagues through that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ro. And that's a really helpful summary there. This strategy is very ambitious. We've set ourselves a mission to be the most digitally advanced and data-driven system in England by 2025, and I think I don't look at that as counting the how many shiny widgets we've managed to deploy and what new technology we've put in. It's really what Rowan's just alluded to. It's how does that translate to a different experience for our citizens. It's simple things like being able to access appointments more easily, to see and book and change appointments from home, to contribute to your own record and to access information that helps you manage your health through, again, through digital means. Moving through services that we provide across the system, health and care and third sector, and having the confidence that the information pertinent for that contact is available at that touch point. And something about, as we do this and as we expand our technology and data capabilities, we're gathering lots of information that we can immediately use to inform how we redesign and focus services more efficiently and based on what our service users perceive as their priorities. So it's been a long time in the gestation, this strategy. It's been 9-10 months of work's gone into producing a set of collateral. There are three big themes within it. To do what we want to aspire to, which is using that data to drive better decision making and improve health and well-being and produce better services, we need a really solid foundation. So we need to ensure every part of our system has an appropriate level of digitization, and that might be as simple as people who are providing services having the right kit to do that and the right support to make decisions and make their working lives most efficient. At a large scale, it's having big electronic records that are fit for purpose across all of our settings, and that's no small task. So there's a big theme throughout this around digitizing to a minimum standard that we're happy with, and that will involve some leveling up between areas where investment hasn't necessarily been at the required level. So there's a big piece collectively we need to do around that. There are things we can do better at scale, and the ICS and the ICB gives us a real opportunity to do things better and bolder at scale. So there are certain components in this strategy that say we'll do this together and we'll procure solutions for the whole system and everyone can benefit. But equally, we recognise within the system there's very different starting points and different demographics. So there will be equally local solutions that meet local requirements. And then a big component is having an expertise at the centre where we provide advice, support, make sure we get value out of the tools and technologies that we do buy. And that's again a critical mass benefit of coming together on a footprint this large. It's absolutely focused on outcomes, this work. It's, as I say, we're not counting new bits of kit. Rowan said at the outset, this is not driven by technologists like me, it's driven by care professionals, and everything we design will be in collaboration with our population. Real focus on user-centered design. There are a number of mechanisms for the strategy to be delivered. We've got transformation programs running in a whole range of areas, and the way I see digital and data, it complements those programs. It's not an end in itself, so we won't have our own separate programs of work. We will be embedded in initiatives to reduce waiting lists, improve elective care, whatever it is. Digital will run seamlessly through that. And an ever-present need for vigilance is around not excluding members of the population. That the challenge of introducing more technology to do all the things I've described is there's a risk that you may exclude people who don't have access to that technology. So a recurring focus throughout everything we do will be about digital inclusion. And there's a lot of good work in some of our places already well advanced in that area. Working towards net zero targets will be fundamental, but also driving value out of everything we do. I'll just quickly go through some of the levelling up work that we're going to do. So I've mentioned digital infrastructure. There's huge opportunities for us to do things across sectors here, rather than in our historic silos of health and care and third sector. We can build an infrastructure that supports genuine collaborative working. We've got a huge programme of work to digitise core care systems, and that will focus a lot of attention and a lot of investment over the next 2-3 years. But that's all in train and has appropriate governance attached to that. Digital skills is paramount in this, and that's not just skilling up my team. This is about all members of staff who work in our services, but also our population, to be co-creators and co-owners of their care and well-being. And that plays into the digital inclusion agenda that I've mentioned. And a big theme running through this is joining all that data up. You might think that should be something that happens automatically, but it's a fairly wicked problem because of the historic way systems have been designed and don't generally interoperate that easy. So that will be a big focus over the next 2-3 years. How do we make sure all our data in its various settings is joined up, and we use the insight contained within to make a real difference? And I've mentioned the critical mass of specialist experience at the centre. This is just an illustration of where we're starting to use data to really understand the population. I'm going to ask Rowan just to expand on this one.
So, in its purest form, one could imagine that any progress in digital will make exclusion of patients worse, because any time we step forward, there will be those who are left behind. So, one of the essential things that I have learnt on my journey is how we can get to the point of finding those highest risk patients. So already we can start to understand those who are at highest risk of being left behind because of where they live. We can map where Wi-Fi is a real challenge, where we've got challenges in educational attainment, deprivation, all of which converge to leave parts of our population at huge risk of being left behind because of technology. But we also know that we can find the health problems that that population lives with and intervene directly. And that intervention can be everything from making sure they have Wi-Fi that functions, making sure that technology is put into their home, and indeed they are supported to interact with that technology. And that technology might be the stuff through which they might report their symptoms or upload what blood pressure is getting up to. But even now, with partners like Docabo, we are able to have that telemetry with those very highest risk clinical patients to look at how we keep them well. We've just been awarded a grant, a health innovation grant, that allows us to look this year now into mapping fuel poverty with clinical conditions and to ask the question, how can we keep people safe and well in their homes by being highly proactive to look at avoiding admission? All of which speaks to this concept of getting our intelligence into action. We cannot just stand by. We must intervene. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Rod. And that's, I think, the differentiator of this strategy to ones that have gone before. There's a huge focus on that, taking insight that we derive today and very quickly turning that into changes in service or directed interventions. And there are a number of examples live at the moment. But that will be a big focus of the next couple of years. This is just an example. I won't go into the detail on this, but this is some of the dashboard data that combined view of data is allowing us to see and act on. The Cypher platform was an acceleration of this agenda in response to pandemic, and it gives us a huge springboard to move on from in curating a really rich and wide data set to do this on a big scale. So throughout the strategy, we'll be focusing on outcomes. So for every £1 spent on digital, we need to make sure there's a direct impact on care and therefore outcomes. It's very easy to spend a lot of money very quickly on technology with the right intentions and not ultimately drive the outcome. So this will be a constant area of focus for our collective teams. And this is just an example of a live piece of system-wide work that is doing just that. So remote monitoring capability through a shared platform. For 200 heart failure patients, this was calculated to have saved 1,500 bed days, approximately £500,000 worth of cost, and clinical outcomes immediately apparent in terms of fewer presentations at ED, reduced admissions. This is just an example of the way we will measure our progress against this strategy. This is just an example of how local places will contribute to the overall strategic progress. This is a piece of work that's come out of Wirral and the Wirral Place. Really exciting, using a whole range of sensors and devices in the home to map and monitor conditions that a patient's living in. And sky's the limit with this this model, really, looking at room temperatures, how often a kettle's turned on. If daily patterns aren't followed, does that mean someone's become unwell, had a fall? Just an example of where technology can be put together to look at multiple measures linked to population health, linked to activity data, and gives us another layer of rich insight to act on. So we're not asking for full approval today. We're bringing this document in its final draft form. We need to go back and just talk to each place, talk to our partners in third sector, voluntary sector, charity sector, to make sure it resonates as a system-wide strategy, and propose to bring that back to a subsequent board for final approval. But following on from today's meeting, the real hard yards start. We've got to have a collective view of available funding and then make some hard decisions around what we prioritise as a system. We can't chase everything, and we need to make sure we're adding value, aligning with ICB level priorities, local place priorities and national requirements, and then being clear on the outcome measures that we expect. And then a costed implementation plan will fall out of this, and we'll do that in partnership across the system. So that is a process of just going back, sense checking some of the targets we've put in here, because there are some ambitious targets for digitisation, and making sure each of our constituent stakeholder groups are comfortable with what we're committing to. And this just talks to how we the delivery vehicle for this strategy, and I think the point I made earlier is key here. This won't be something governed separately and managed separately. Digital will run throughout all of the transformation agendas that we're collectively focused on, and different component parts of the strategy will support multiple transformation agendas. This needs some careful work, and we're doing that already within our wider PMO discussions internally. So I'll stop there. I'll sit back down, but we can take any questions. Thanks, Raj.
Thanks, Rowan and John. Questions or comments? David?
Just checking the IT works first. I'd just like to say really good work there around digital inclusion, and you mentioned making sure nobody was excluded. I think we've still got to emphasise with the cost of living pressures at the moment, you know, you're looking at people who might be not able to top up mobile phones or dropping Wi-Fi from you know, the other bills we've got to pay. So I think that you have a focus on that of making sure nobody's left behind, and also still giving that option that there are other ways for people to get the healthcare. It's not always reliant on digital.
Just on that final point, I think that's critical, that we don't close off traditional routes. These need to run in parallel, and people need a choice. And I think in terms of understanding people's ability to use the technology and the financial component, that's another rich bit of data that we can start to build into our overall understanding. But I think where there's key services running, relying on technology, that's part of the monitoring.
We've got Joe, then Steve, and then Ian.
Thanks very much. I think this is really, really good. I welcome it, and I welcome the emphasis on connecting data so that it sort of, by definition, extracts us from our silos and gets us thinking more broadly. I just want to pick up the point, but about the digital exclusion piece, and specifically, I think as sort of cost of living stuff does tighten. I mean, the British Academy published something this week that showed if you were in a household with less than £25,000 income per annum, 20% of people never use the internet in those houses. 35% of people with a disability never use the internet, and more like 50% of people over 65, again in those households, never use the internet. So, I mean, it's really significant, this one. I know it's logged here, but I think, you know, we really need to see a risk mitigation approach when, you know, we put meat on the bones of this. Then the second point would just be, I haven't seen any reference to data quality in all this. Now, it's probably there in a more detailed description, but I think if we don't get the data quality right, you can do lots of this stuff, and well, I'm preaching to the converted here, I know, in this instance, but a DQ reference somewhere would be good. But it's really good.
Just on that last point, I totally agree. I think as you're aggregating data up to a system level and have ambitions to do A, B, and C with it, the actual data quality focus is where it's captured, isn't it? Which might be in multiple organisations. So I think you're absolutely right. We need a governance construct and a set of carrot and stick approaches around data quality right through this. But there's an educational piece. I think there's something around understanding when you're committing some information into a system where that use is going to end up, really, and that's a system-wide educational piece.
Sean. Steve?
Well, first of all, welcome the presentation, but also slightly daunted by the challenges that we have in front of us, really. And I'm glad you used the word prioritise. Everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, nothing ever gets done. So if you're going to make sure you achieve against the 4 objectives, I'm pleased to hear that. I mean, there's been a litany of difficulties and failures, quite frankly, around digital implementation over the years. Shared care records, as mentioned in the presentation. We've got to make sure we have a strategy, but we have a plan to deliver this, and making sure we deliver it in a simple and understandable way. We all know where we are in terms of progress.
Wise words, Steve, thank you. Ian?
Just to say thank you both for the presentation, really. We mentioned something called the Combined Intelligence of Population Health Action. It really came into its own during the pandemic and during how we delivered our vaccine programmes for flu and COVID. And it's great to see that build on and lessons learned that going through the paper. I know there's been a lot of engagement with local leads as well now, which is starting to come through. And it was just 2 things really. One is it's great to see the inclusion elements. I won't repeat what others said, but that's really something we need to look at together. But the workforce. So in the same way across everything else, our analytics, trying to have a consistent supportive approach to keep the best and attract people in to do that, so we can turn that data into action is really important. So just say thank you for that and look forward to working with you on it.
Thanks, Ian. The comments, John Rowan, a couple of comments from me. One is the opportunities that this strategy present, not just in terms of achieving the outcomes that you've articulated, but also in terms of the social value that we can bring back and the economic value that we can bring back to our region. Seeking to understand how we're going to work with the ecosystem of potential partners, local partners that could support, growth of jobs, prosperity, etc. is really, really important. And I just want to re-emphasise what Steve said. We have seen this sort of thing before. A clear execution plan with associated business cases and clear benefit realisation is of critical importance. I do wonder, I'm just going to seek board's views on this. There will be a mixed set of experiences around our board around leading digital programmes. Would it be useful for our board to understand a bit more about how digital programmes should be led, given the extent and the significant nature of this programme? Anybody have any views on that? Neil?
Yeah, I think that's it, because my point is going to be the same as Steve's. The scale of this agenda is enormous. The prioritisation resource is going to be key, and we can raise a lot of expectations and not deliver, so we've got to focus on what's achievable. And I like some of the benefits, like understanding the impact of heating in a person's home on their health. But so what? Have we got the means to actually do anything about it? So setting up systems whereby we can actually deliver against them as well is so important.
John, can I look to you, because I know your experience with the National Academy, to see what you could do to support this board in raising its awareness of how to lead digital programmes to develop, meaningful impact?
Absolutely, absolutely. And can I come back on Neil's point? I think that it's a really important point. There will be a set of priorities that of necessity mean discontinuing some other work, and I think that's the tough decision we need to make. And actually, where we've got capability like robotic process automation, we've got quite good spread already. There's huge productivity gains there, so there's an effort of just making sure everyone's aware of it and the opportunities, and then squeezing the value out of something that's already been built. So I think they're the two things I think we need to think about. Exploiting existing capability, and then what the hard decisions about discontinuing certain pieces of work.
Thanks, John.
And just to finally add to that, knowing that we are in challenge times with our resources, my expectation is what our understanding of our patients brings us through the richness of data is precise interventions for those we know will gain most, those at highest risk, rather than trying to do a piece of work across an entire neighbourhood. Actually, we can now identify those with highest risk, with most to gain by us intervening. And I think bringing a very precise approach to our clinical care, underpinned by the incredible data that we have flowing, is one of the crucial routes to our success through this. Because as you say, you know, we can't do everything everywhere, but getting that foundation right unlocks all of that potential, I believe. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. So the paper's here to raise the awareness of the board of this work. It's going to come back in due course, I think, John, to ensure the board continues to be fully engaged with this important programme. Thank you. Claire and Chris, I think we onto the EDO. Chris and
Thank you, Chair. I'll start and then pass over to Claire. So as the report states, as a statutory body, NHS Cheshire and Merseyside will be required to report under the Equality Act and the public sector equality duty provisions, which make sure that it does three things, and they're listed in the paper, but I think it's really important just to stress those. So we have to eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment, victimisation and other conduct which is prohibited by the Act. Secondly, we are required to advance equality of opportunity between people who share protected characteristics and those who don't. And finally, we have to foster good relationships between people who share a protected characteristic and those who don't. But I think our approach to equality, diversity and inclusion should not just be shaped by what the law tells us that we have to do. It should be very much about what we want to do and what we aspire to do. And whilst we must give advanced consideration to issues on equality and discrimination before making key decisions that can impact on those who share a protected characteristic, it is imperative that as a board we consider all of our decisions through an equality lens, and I think we should expect to have really robust challenge about what the impact of our decision is for all of those with the protected characteristics and all of our communities. From a workforce perspective, it is absolutely critical, based on everything we've heard today, that we create the right environment for staff to come and work across Cheshire and Merseyside and indeed into the Integrated Care Board, into an environment that feels safe, where they feel that they'll be given the maximum opportunities and allowed to flourish. We outline in the paper some of the work that we'll be undertaking in relation to our duties as we report under the Workforce Race Equality Standards and in the future the Workforce Disability Equality Standards, and we're working towards creating a single workforce profile, so we absolutely understand the makeup of our workforce, and that will allow us to report under our duty for the gender pay gap. We're also required to report under the Equality Delivery System known as EDS2. I think this is a really important piece of work that we'll have to do, and it's very much based on engagement with our communities. It's not something we do in isolation, but we work with our communities, we work with all of our partner organisations to assess ourselves, both in terms of the quality that we deliver to our local residents, but also the impact it can have on staff. It allows us to judge in terms of things like our approach to inclusive leadership, and the environment that we create for everyone to flourish. We will be required to determine whether or not, as an ICB, we are underdeveloped, developing, achieving or excelling. But what it does do is really lays down those foundations and allow us to set our agenda for equality, diversity and inclusion. And I think it's important to stress that this goes throughout all of our work, and the Altogether Fair also has a real focus around equality and sets some very focused targets for us as a system. And so before I hand to Claire, I just want to say I think we've failed if we ever view equality, diversity, inclusion in a silo approach. It absolutely underpins everything we do in this organisation. Claire.
Thank you. So I just want to pick up this area in terms of, I suppose, service improvement, service development. As an organisation, we have to consider this in everything we commission, everything we look to transform, everything we look to redesign, and also to decommission. So we will have to, we've had a conversation today around finances and performance, we will have to make some difficult decisions in the future, and we need to make sure that equality, diversity, inclusion is writ large through that sort of prioritisation and decommissioning or commissioning approach. So in the paper in section 4, you can see a number of examples where we are doing this already. So you can see in the service change and transformation, we've looked at equality impact assessments for some of the papers that we brought to the board on stroke and on reconfiguration of local university hospitals' clinical services. The paper we brought in September about major service change, this is a piece of work we will be looking at across all of our, I suppose, successor to CCG work, but we need to make sure that any prioritisation, any impact assessment, this is considered. So there's a whole list of examples there. I think it's important in our procurement as well, and you can see we've looked at impact assessments around our procurement in Liverpool and Sefton in our GP contracts recently. There's a small working group that's been set up which will sort of build on the work that's happened to date, and that will form part of the basis of the work that we'll bring back, as Chris has said, to February board. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions or comments on this? Okay, so it's good to see this paper here. I would urge us to let me start again. I think it's going to be really important to see the data that we know we already have. For example, the RES and the DES data around our staff coming to this board in that regular way, so that we can understand the progress that's being made around our ambitions, and similarly, Claire, around probably some things like Core 20 plus.
Yeah.
Can you give me a view about when we'll actually see data on about progress that's being made on reducing inequalities against the protected characteristics?
I don't know. Ian, can you help with that in terms of targets? It's whether we bring it here, we'll bring it here, but I think it's also an agenda item for the HCP as well.
Yep.
In terms of Core 20 plus 5.
So NHS Core 20 plus 5, and it focuses on 5 different sort of different areas about making and tackling inequalities. So you can look at it alongside staff, but our patients as well. So we can combine that. There was also a recent addition around children's and young people. So it might be that we bring something collective to that. And there was also just a reference from the previous one. We had the first healthcare partnership meeting, which was in the Graham's report. Went down very well. That also looked at inequalities around fuel poverty and the data, and how we're going out to some of our those real reach into those homes that we need to get to, so we can bring something back in that could be aligned if that's helpful.
That'd be really useful, Ian, because I know through North West Region Director of Public Health, is it Andrew? Andrew reports on a regular basis around Core 20 plus. So from that, I know what our position is as strong as we would want it. So if we can understand that data here, would be really useful. Thank you. The report here for noting, really important, as you both said. Thank you. Should we go on to primary secondary care consensus on primary secondary care interface? Rowan.
Thank you, Chair. I think bringing this paper forward and this piece of work forward, for which I must pass the credit to our primary care lead, Dr. John Griffiths, who is a GP in Cheshire, I hope demonstrates precisely what we are here for as a system. When it comes to starting to break down some of the silos within which health and care has operated for a long time now, here we are looking to address some of those issues as an agreement within the system. And it's perhaps a starting place that absolutely extols where this can be difficult and run into problems. We can create pathways, but unless the set of behaviours and actions and agreed principles of managing and even designing those pathways, unless we get that right, we have patients in the middle of this who miss out because of challenges in communication, who is responsible for what at each side of their journey. The journey between primary and secondary care should be seamless. But I don't doubt that all of us can think to examples where that has not worked in the way it is intended. And so again, whereas a system, I see one of our functions to almost be the oil between the cogs, I hope this paper speaks to precisely that need. And so we have developed a consensus that is a set of principles behind it between how our primary care colleagues, that's not just GPs, but across primary care, should be interfacing and working alongside those in secondary care. So really simple things sit at the heart of this. Not surprising, some behaviours and treating colleagues with respect, but most importantly, keeping the patient at the centre of all we do. And that if you need an action for a patient, can you do it yourself? And if not, what is the agreed way in which that will take place? Now that sounds really, really obvious, but for example, it's not unusual that patients arrive in A&E, a whole battery of tests are undertaken, some of which reveal a problem pertinent to the reason they've presented, and those clinicians get on and deal with that, but also are a finding of incidental omas, unexpected clinical findings that tumble out, which are then rapidly passed back to GP colleagues to sort out. And are we getting that level of communication and follow-up right? In the same way, our GPs are sending patients through, and indeed are supporting patients sitting on waiting lists, that perhaps we ask the question, are those patients as optimised as perhaps they could be? And so, whilst I'll let colleagues take in some of the detail, to now have an agreed set of principles that allow us to re-question every pathway we have, and to demand that they are embedded at the heart of every new pathway we design, I hope will therefore bring forward that far closer cooperation and working. The trick is to get everybody signed up to this. So it is on an extensive journey through both our primary care forums and also our secondary care forums, so that we can get this to every clinician and start to cut through some of the challenges, the unhelpful challenges that leave patients missing out in the middle if we get those working relationships in the very best state that they can be. I will pause at that point in case there are any questions from colleagues on this.
Sorry, my microphone didn't work properly there. I really welcome this. I think this is hugely important in that consistency of approach and the consistency of data and communication, so absolutely bang on. And just to confirm from a primary care provider leadership forum, this iterated several times, and I think we're happy with where it got to, so that's hugely supported. There are some elements that will require a significant amount of joint working from providers, both secondary care providers as well as primary care providers of all types, to get right. And I think that's going to be where the real devil in the detail is how we get the implementation of this correct and how we do. There is one point of correction in the thing, which I've only just picked up today actually, is around the smoking cessation advanced service in pharmacy. I think it was due to come soon in the documentation. Just to confirm, we've now got to the point that's launched, and actually some of our trusts have already made that live, so that's now here. One thing I do want to pull out, the discharge medicine service is absolutely crucial to patient safety on transfer of care. So this is a service where data about someone discharged from hospital gets sent both to community pharmacy and in the background into general practice as well. And I think we probably need a future item at board to see how each trust is doing on that and where they might need support, because I think that's something around this table we might need to add to the national support to make it live and make it real.
And with a new head of pharmacy, you know, that our chief pharmacist appointed, Suzanne Lynch, I know that is already a focus for her to make sure that that safe transition of patients runs as smartly and smoothly as it can. So thank you, and I very much appreciate your support.
Thank you. Paul?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, a very helpful and sensible piece of work that I'm sure all of us would welcome. Just to ask, though, how will we as an ICB get to know how this progresses and how it is signed up to by everybody and the reality and practice, and maybe sometimes how we'll hear when it doesn't go right?
Right,
Yeah.
just before you answer that, can I, and Joe, from a collaborative perspective, fully supportive of this? Yeah, thank you. Go on.
So absolutely, you only know it's worked if you go out and test it. And so alongside getting this launched and socialised, we then got a programme of work that will say, with new pathways is this being embedded, and straightforward things, surveying our clinicians as to how that's working out for them. At least we've now got a point of contact in which that can be discussed with an agreed set of principles, and we'll bring that back through both primary care forums, medical director forums, and follow up on that. And I'd be delighted to bring some feedback to board over the next 12 months perhaps as to what progress we've made. Clearly it's resonating elsewhere, and I'm delighted that John is finding this document even making its way up to a national level now, finding some real interest, that somewhere is prepared to grasp that important issue of getting our ways of working the smoothest and smartest they can be. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's here to endorse the consensus and agree on those proposed actions that are on the paper. People happy with that? Thank you. Should we go to the, I think it's the winter plan next?
Thanks, Chairman. So this paper is a follow-up to the paper that we presented last month, which gave very much a Cheshire and Mersey overview of the approach to winter planning. This paper takes us down to a level of detail across each of our places and covers three main areas, really. First of all, there was the main thematic approach to winter, which recaps early in the part of the paper, but then it goes into Table 1, where it shows some very localised winter plans that have been developed. And Section 2 is very specifically around some of the engaging work that's been done with the voluntary sector. And it may be Warren or Alison may want to reference, particularly where we're sat right now, some of the very interesting and impactful work that's been undertaken at Warrington Hospital recently. I won't drop down to any level of the detail of the paper, but just to say that over the month of November, the ICB's has met with 7 out of the 9 places so far. The further 2 are scheduled over the next week. And that's given places and providers and local authority executives the opportunity to not only showcase what they've done in terms of winter preparation, but the collaboration that's taking place. There's a strong push for understanding the impact of what those plans will bring, and similarly an ask that during Q4 and beyond that a review is done of the impact of those winter plans. Quite often within winter planning we get stuck into the routine of just doing what we did last year without properly understand whether or not it had good impact. So that's been part of the process we've been through in terms of governance. So I won't drop into any more detail unless asked.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? Steve?
Well, first of all, welcome the plan. As this moves forward and you're going to have further discussions at place-based level, I do think there's a bit of a gap in terms of a number of really interesting initiatives taking place around councils and the voluntary sector, things such as food banks and support for energy fuel poverty. A lot of work's going on there. I classify all those under prevention. They're the very sort of issues, heat or eat, that prevent people from arriving in the acute system in the first place. So just whether at a place-based level, some of those initiatives, and there are a myriad of them, can be captured. So we've got a holistic approach to winter planning for the ICB.
Thank you. Alison?
Yeah, thank you. And just following on from what Stephen said, there is a number of different initiatives happening with the voluntary sector across all of the 9 places, but specifically around hospital discharge. Warrington was awarded a significant amount of money through NHS Charities Trust, and it's really shown the impact of integrating the voluntary sector within the discharge team has made a real difference in terms of supporting the hospital discharge, to engage with and embed the voluntary sector, linking with community services that will support people to not to be readmitted into hospital. So at the moment we're working with around 140 patients a month and supporting them to access VCSE services, but also to access the mobilisation of volunteers across the place as well, to support those individuals at home, to enable them to remain at home more independently. So I think the resource there showed it does make a difference and there is an impact. So there has been a report produced on that, which I think we have shared across the ICB, but we are looking at how we can sort of measure the impact as well on that. So we'll share that at a later date. Thank you.
Anne?
I suppose I'm looking to Anthony for a bit more assurance around the rigour and the metrics that will be applied to some of these plans. I mean, you know, you've got that list of plans and I'm sure they're underpinned by much more detail, but if they're very vague and aspirational, that list of things that are in the winter plans, you know, things like make the virtual wards work better, how, when, why, you know, what's going to change, and things like more timely discharges, it's all a bit kind of vague. So I suppose given the rigour with which, you know, secondary care has to submit plans, I'm assuming the same amount of rigour's there and that there's proper metrics and rigour underpinning some of these plans so that we can be sure what the impact is expected to be and when it's expected to be effective.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, you know, that was probably the common question as we went through each of the reviews with each of the places to say, you know, get the planning, get the approach, get the estimated impact, but we need to get into a pattern of understanding. So what does it deliver, when did it deliver, and we need to have the tracking mechanism in place. So that'll be part and parcel of the routine monitoring that the ICB has with place in terms of coordinating the overall delivery of that. But I think you're absolutely, transparency is key, and we should probably enhance some of the metrics coming through to CMAS to demonstrate that.
Thank you. Joe?
Yes, it's a sort of version of Anne's point, but it relates to the back-end evaluation of all of this. I think if you don't have that sort of rigour, it's hard to evaluate at the back end. And could we seek to have some sort of objectivity around the evaluation? Because we all ask ourselves how we did. We're all going to say we did really well. But there's only one opportunity really to learn from this, and I think therefore having some audit review is really essential.
Anthony, can we organise that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So as I said, the impact on the place was to give us the trajectory for monitoring, and we need to make that visible, but also understand the consistent application of the metrics.
And I think Joe was asking for evaluation done objectively, not by us, to understand cause and effect.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. So when I read this report, but my first reaction was great. It was really good to see, you know, those headlines around place winter plans and the contribution of the voluntary sector. Two things for me. One is understanding how we spread best practice. Now, Alison, you've talked about some work that you've done in Warrington, validated it. If it works really well, why aren't we doing it in, you know, deepest, darkest Cheshire or somewhere? It's that learning mechanism. And the second one relates probably to Anne and Joe's and others' comment. It'd be really good to see each of the places RAG rated against the delivering of the expected promises.
Yeah. So first of all, we do have a system winter operational group which meets every Wednesday afternoon. So that has the urgent care representatives from each of the places, along with COO representatives and clinical representatives from across the patch. That initially was set up in terms of the approach to Winton and making sure necessary documentation was done, but it's now moved into the cross-learning of the winter plans, and it will also move into the cross-learning as plans are mobilised and the impact is assessed. Equally, there are corresponding both regional and national approaches to that as well. So there's been the latest winter planning event at Haydock Park a few weeks back, which was for the whole of the Northwest, so we can get that cross-learning and probably a less successful national event that got very focused on one particular component only a fortnight ago. So it is part of our approach to ensure that learning is done, and the ICB can play its part in sharing that across the 9 paces, which was there to some extent last time, but probably not as rigorous as what we hope to bring to it this year.
Thanks, Anthony. And Claire, perhaps through you, could we suggest to Louise Gittings, the chair of the Partnership Board, that the Partnership Board receives a report on place-based winter plans so that we can see the totality? Yeah. It'd be really good, and I'm sure they'll contribute to that. The report was here for noting. Sorry, Rowan.
Sorry, only to say perhaps by way of some further assurance, for example, with virtual wards, we've set a review up to ask the very simple question: if we're not fully utilising them, why is that? Is that because the offer doesn't quite match the demand from patients in hospital? Are they suitable? Is it about making sure our clinicians are more confident about moving patients onto those wards? Have we got the level of communication and the detail of patients who are suitable to move into those spaces? So I've got a clinical review now to try and get to the bottom of, well, there's an offering, why are we still struggling with a mismatch in that space, and what can we therefore do to make them more functional? So that's already underway. Thank you.
Thanks, Rowan. I'm guessing that could be then linked to us understanding the contribution it's making to no criteria to reside.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're linking that with Anthony's team as well. So with a bit of luck, that will give us more insight and allow us to evolve that programme so that it is giving us the best it can.
Thank you. Thanks. Any other questions? Therefore noting, I'll be very brief on Cheshire and Merseyside ICP board feedback from the first meeting. People can see the paper in front of you. I'm sure you've had a chance to read it. Are there any questions on this?
Thanks, Chair. Not a question, but a comment that I'm really pleased to see that the board has been properly established and that Councillor Louise Gittins has been elected as chair. She's given me very positive feedback about the meeting. It was really good that all 9 local authorities were represented, and there's obviously particular enthusiasm for the work of the Altogether Fairer board and getting together to tackle health inequalities. So a lot of kudos, I think, for everybody around that work that's in its early days. Just one small point on the report, if Councillor Gittins' name could be spelt correctly.
Thank you. Neil?
Yeah, but 422, just an observation perhaps. The Chair may ask any of the many or all of those who normally attend but who are not members to withdraw to facilitate open and frank discussion of particular matters. 2 points there. I would hope that the HCP meetings were all open and frank anyway. But the second thing is the public meetings, aren't they?
So, Raj, do you want me to do this? So this is in the terms of reference, isn't it?
Yeah. Page.
They are meetings in public, like the ICB.
Page 247.
Yes, so they are meetings in public. So that's the first, I think that's the second point, wasn't it? And
but anybody could attend as member of the public, even if they attend not as members anyway.
Yes.
So asking somebody to withdraw doesn't seem to work then if there's meetings in public.
So these are draft terms of reference, and there's an opportunity for
that's why I raised.
Okay, thank you. So there's
I just want to look how you clarify that in terms of how it works, because if the meeting's in public, everybody can stay there. And the second point, just again, I don't want to labour this, give people documents to read, but it's 6.2. Members of those attending the H6 shall behave in accordance with the ICB's constitution, standing orders and standards of business conduct. Now, I don't suspect they're going to read all those, but can we be clear that they all know how to access them if they would need to?
Yeah, we can, and I think also we need to recognise that we hope it will be a joint committee. So there's both the NHS ICB's constitution and standing business conduct policy, but also those of our other member partners, the 9 local authorities. Yeah. So the point bringing it today, that the draft terms of reference, is to say that the 9 local authorities will be working with the ICB to sort of go through the terms of reference to make sure that they feel confident to sign up to this as a committee of the local authority. And if we do that, hopefully we can be a joint committee, which then we actually hold each other to account in the decisions we make. So we will have to bring these terms of reference back to the ICB at a future date. So what we're asking today is that everyone has an opportunity to review the terms of reference. We'll do that in partnership with the local authority member partners and then bring them back. We're hoping to bring them back by May at the latest. But obviously that will be down to a conversation between Matthew, the Associate Director of Governance, and the legal leads at each of the local authorities. So we'll take that forward over the next 2 or 3 months, but that's the ambition of the HCP, that we can get the terms of reference signed off so it can become a joint committee.
Just making that point that the public meeting, so excluding anybody seems difficult, so you might want to look how you would manage that.
Okay, thank you, but I think there might be some confusion in terms of the founding members and the founding members of the 9 local authorities and the ICB, and obviously Raj is our representative, so we'll just check the wording, but thank you for that.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks, Claire. Any other questions or comments on the papers?
Could I just say that in terms of 1.2, I think we're really pleased that we will be asking one of our members of the voluntary community and faith sector to be the joint co-vice chair. Friday was the deadline for the expressions of interest, and we've had 3. So that's really positive. So we'll be able to take forward before Christmas a process to get somebody appointed. Sounds a bit grand, but and then they'll be there for the meeting in January.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Good. Great, thank you. We go on to the subcommittee reports. Tony?
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that because the timing of the Quality and Performance Committee and this meeting wasn't time to get a written report in, so I'll just pick up a few of the salient points from the meeting. Probably there's a theme to the comments that emerged when I was writing them up. It's about the improving use of data and intelligence and a continued focus on risk at the committee, which is pretty impressive that we've got to that stage after just a few meetings. It's really a strong development there. One report we receive each meeting is from the Place Associate Director of Quality in an aggregated report. It provides an awful lot of intelligence for us. And just to pick up a few of the points raised by the Associate Director of Quality, there was assurance from Liverpool regarding Liverpool University Foundation Trust that processes are in place to improve cancer performance. Liverpool and Sefton and also Wirral and Cheshire in slightly different forms all raise concerns about continuing healthcare. So that's something that the committee will return to later, but it is noted that there is some variation there. And Sefton reported good engagement with the local maternity system in seeking some assurance from their provider over governance concerns. So these are very strong messages from the Associate Directors of Place. The performance report provided by Anthony and analysed allowed us this time to have a, I haven't gone to a deep dive yet, but it's certainly a closer look at the data. Previously we've looked at cancer, this time we looked at the very complex, as we realised, situation around urgent and planned care. Looking at handover delays, 12-hour waits, and the capacity challenges in a number of trusts, resulting in a significant shortfall in patient experience. That was recognised by the committee. But such was the complexity that we've decided to pretty well devote the next meeting to looking further into this to get a real grip on this, if we can, from the data and from the intelligence, to look at the potential for improvements there. Interestingly, following on from the meeting, Chris chaired the System Quality Group, which again looked at, because we had a presentation from North West Ambulance and from the NHS lead for care homes about accident and emergency and the impacts on patient experience and the challenges in the system. So we're developing a good, rich source of data and intelligence there that we can use. The patient safety theme was present again. We received a report that evidenced the work by the Task and Finish group to get to grips with the serious incidents reported across 9 places. Quite a complex picture, but we're now able to begin to theme that and provide a comprehensive view across all places and trusts. But we've got coming up, and Chris will explain further if you need it, the move towards the national standard framework, so we've got to get ready for that. I liked the comments that there was a positive work noted from Warrington and Halton places in engaging with primary care and care homes to make sure they're not left out of this patient safety process. So that for me is a very important point raised. We received a progress report about the development of learning disability and autism dashboard, which also now includes social care. So again, our pattern of development around data and intelligence is improving all the time. We received assurance from the Learning from Deaths of People and Lives and People with a Learning Disability programme, which highlighted the need for a whole system focus on reducing health inequalities for people with a learning disability and autistic people. Again, the theme was workforce development in the service was crucial to deliver improvements. And the last one was an interesting, innovative one provided by Rowan, which was the use of cipher data in housing. So I'll not steal your thunder, Rowan. Could you just give us a quick update on that?
We've already had some engagement with our council colleagues because, again, coming back to what we've already said with our entire digital strategy, being precise to find those in most need. So the initial contact with council colleagues who were managing large housing lists, when I bring up the offer to say, if you've got a group of patients that you're trying to house and you're looking to add some clinical prioritisation against that, do you know those who might be living in poor quality, cold, mouldy conditions who are living with respiratory disease, and therefore you would want to prioritise? And the response has been both with our colleagues in Chester, and there's an initiative already started up in Liverpool to say, yes, that would significantly support good quality decision making. And so we're looking to take that forward, again, across our system, because it's the right thing for patient-centred care. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions or comments for Tony? No, thank you, Tony. I think you're next again. Okay.
Yeah, I'm taking this. Obviously, Erica's not here. So we had the second meeting of the System Primary Care Committee, which I think went very well. It's quite a new committee, so we're sort of learning as we go along. But we had I had a helpful update on the primary care target operating model, how Place works with sort of the at-scale work and how we work at Place. There'll be some further refinement of that as we go through the sort of the final stages of the staff consultation and structures, so I think that'll be helpful. We also had a really helpful deep dive from our Place directors where they presented actions on GP access and Fuller, which I think was quite a long presentation, but some really helpful data which we can share, and then a further conversation around primary care finance, and particularly around the R's monies. So I think I've got this right, additional roles recruitment scheme monies. Good. So this is where we have general practice has got national funding to try and recruit a new workforce into primary care. So there are some unallocated funding, and we're sort of trying to come up with innovative ways to get that funding into Cheshire and Merseyside. And we also had an update on the community pharmacy contractual changes. We are bringing a deep dive around community pharmacy to December's meeting. I know, Adam, you might want to say something about this. The board will remember we took on community pharmacy services in July from NHS England as part of the delegation work. So I think we're going to have a useful conversation just to sort of give the board a greater understanding around community pharmacy.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think you can see it on the board that's at the back there that we've got we had 590 community pharmacies when we took ownership. I think we're now down to 582 from my data. And I think understanding why that number has changed, why it's changed significantly over 10 years, but also what the potential of community pharmacy is really, really important to the work that we can do to alleviate pressures elsewhere in the system. So I really welcome the fact that we're looking at a deep dive in December.
Thank you. We had an update on the delegation of dentistry and optometry. So we'll get feedback nationally in December about our work and due diligence we've done on that. And what I'm proposing is that we bring a formal paper here in February about sort of recommending to board that we take those services on from NHS England, and obviously with that will come associated risk. I know at previous board meetings we've talked about dental access and other issues around dentistry in particular, so I want to bring something back formally in February about that. And then I'm proposing also through the Primary Care Committee that we'll bring a primary care strategy to March board.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Questions or comments for Claire? Thank you. Is it Claire Wilson for this one? Yes.
So in Eric's absence, I'll go through the points that were raised and discussed at the last Finance Investment Resources Committee, but the executive colleagues on the board they want to add as well from their perspective. So we reviewed the committee work plan, and it's something that we're keeping under scrutiny, I guess, because there are, it's a new committee and we're adding all the time to that. The committee received the Liverpool University Hospitals finance review, which we've talked about here before. So this was an external review undertaken by PwC with a number of recommendations. The Trust have an action plan to address those recommendations and are developing a recovery plan which will look at their 3-year financial position in the medium term, and that's due for sort of finalisation of the first draft by the end of this week. We also discussed the financial strategy and how we're intending to approach that, but conscious that at that time when we met, the autumn statement hadn't happened, and we obviously are still now waiting for the detailed financial planning guidance, which will come at the end of December. And whilst there was some real optimism with a really fair settlement, we do know obviously it will still be very challenging. But we await the detail on that, and the committee will keep up to speed with that as and when we hear more every month. Chris also gave an update to the committee on the workforce consultation that we are undertaking at the moment with our own staff, because this committee not only looks at financial elements of the system and ICB position, but also the ICB's own resources committee is part of the terms of reference of this as well. And then finally, we received a number of operational financial policies, just part and parcel of the governance of establishing one finance function from the 9 statutory organisations that we've inherited. So I'll pause there, but I'll open it up to both Neil and Tony, who were at the meeting from a non-exec perspective. Any other comments?
Nope. Any other questions or comments from board members? No. Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Let's go on to responses from questions raised by members of the public. As is our usual process, those will be up on our website. We have had a lot of questions, and the responses will be up on our website as soon as possible, hopefully within the week. And some closing remarks. Firstly, is to thank our colleagues from Warrington for hosting us here. Great venue, very good presentation, and our best wishes to Elspeth, and let's make sure we do meet up with her in the future. That would be great. Comms from this meeting, usual sort of way. There'll be a summary of this meeting up on the website pretty quickly. All that remains to be said is thank you very much. Good, productive meeting. Thank you. I forgot to say to the members of the public, thank you very much.